If you went back to 2015 and told an Undertale fan that Fox's next version of Flowery was going to be an anime pretty boy, they probably would have just laughed you out of the room. Not gonna lie. Back then, we associated that name with psychological horror and pretty much just soullessness. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. So when Chapter 5 dropped and introduced us to this Flowery, it caught us off guard completely. But looking at how Chapter 5 unfolds, the dynamic we got actually between Flowery and Ralsei is easily one of the most best parts of the chapter, in my opinion. For pretty much the whole chapter, things between them are rocky, to say the least. Flowery spends a massive chunk of his screen time just messing with Ralsei, pushing his buttons and driving him crazy, if I'm being honest. Both, but if you look past the teasing, it's not outwardly malicious though. Flowery is incredibly observant. He looks at Ralsei and immediately picks up on all his inner conflicts, his anxieties, and frankly his massive hypocrisy. They act like oil and water right from the jump because they aren't just two characters bickering. They are two completely opposite philosophies headbutting. To understand why they clash so hard from the beginning, you have to look at the massive amount of baggage Ralsei has been carrying since Chapter 1. Ralsei was the first person to ever hear about the prophecy, so when you grow up alone in an empty castle, completely isolated, with that kind of burden over your head and knowledge, your brain defaults to the strict rule. This is what's supposed to happen, so it has to happen no matter what. But by the time we hit Chapter 4, that mindset is already starting to crack. Ralsei tries to hide what looks like the true prophecy from Susie to protect her, but it completely backfires. Susie lashes out because she's sick of the secrets, demanding that he finally starts treating them like real partners instead of just keeping secrets in line. And he tries to be more honest moving forward. But going into Chapter 5, he's still actively wrestling with two massive internal issues. There's his absolute terror of the prophecy actually coming true, and there's his deeply personal transcoded identity journey that we've been tracking through all of the chapters. But out of these two things, Flowery is more interested in calling out the prophecy hypocrisy more than anything else though. See, Ralsei started this game believing the prophecy was an unchangeable law of nature, but the more time he spends with Chris, Susie, and all these different darkeners, the more he starts realizing a really uncomfortable truth. Darkeners might just be everyday objects in the light world, but here, they're real people with their own lives, complex feelings, hopes, and dreams. Because of that realization, Ralsei is trapped trying to have his cake and eat it too. He's desperately clinging to his unhealthy, rigid belief that fate is set in stone, while simultaneously harboring a secret, desperate hope that maybe it isn't. He's basically that classic tragic character archetype, that one who is cursed with knowledge exactly of how things are supposed to end, forcing himself to be the narrator of the tragedy, but still wanting it to not happen, basically. And that's exactly where Flowery comes in to throw a massive wrench in everything. Flowery brings up metafictional questions that the main trio never even thought to ask. His biggest point isn't just aimed at Ralsei, it's aimed at all three of them honestly, and at us the player. He asks, why does Castletown get a free pass to stay open while every other dark world has to be forced shut? And honestly, when you sit down and think about it, is he wrong? Why does Castletown deserve to exist any more other than a world full of cyber citizens or puzzle pieces who had their own families, goals, and daily routines? Flowery uses this exact moral dilemma to get right under Ralsei's skin, and it works flawlessly. You can practically feel the heavy guilt hitting both Ralsei and Susie when they think about the sheer number of residents who probably lost their lives, or at least their realities, in the worlds they sealed. Given how massive some of those dark worlds actually are though, there's no way the player recruited or pacified every single darkener in there. Flowery points out that by saving the world according to the prophecy, they are essentially acting as cosmic executioners for everyone else. When Flowery mocks Ralsei for blindly serving lighteners like a mindless servant, Ralsei completely snaps. We've almost never seen him get this angry before, but it's a deeply human reaction though. Ralsei's anger looks exactly like the denial someone experiences in real life when a core belief they've held their entire life is suddenly and effortlessly disproven by an outsider. Admitting your worldview is wrong is terrifying because it means your whole life up to that point was built on a lie. If the prophecy isn't absolute, then all of Ralsei's suffering and isolation was for nothing. Christianity. What makes this dynamic so incredible is that Flowery isn't just a cynical contrarian. He actually represents a completely different kind of altruism. Flowery's kindness, on the other hand, is intensely personal. Everything Flowery does in Chapter 5 is motivated by his protective love for Asgore. He created his own little kingdom and challenged the rules of the world just to repay Asgore for keeping him and the other flowers alive. This is why the climax of their relationship in Chapter 5's boss fight hits so hard though. Even though they've pretty much spent like 90% of the chapter just bickering, when the knight slashes and pretty much kills him, Ralsei still goes to help, and Chris and Susie are still there to mourn. But the absolute best part of this entire dynamic is that despite all the teasing, Flowery genuinely wants Ralsei to change his mind. He explicitly tells Ralsei to start putting faith in himself. And Ralsei's reaction tells you everything you need to know. Even though he calls Flowery arrogant and reckless, Ralsei secretly wants to see Flowery fight against the system. If Flowery can win, then Ralsei's worldview is proven wrong pretty much. And that's really the irony though. Ralsei literally wants to be wrong, or at least a part of him does. Which makes it incredibly rough when the knight shows up at the end of the chapter and cuts Flowery down, basically snuffing out that tiny bit of hope and forcing Ralsei back into his prison. At the end of the day, they have a perfect frenemies dynamic if you ask me. They don't actually hate each other, they just deeply frustrated by their different conflicting worldviews. But if you ask me, for a game that is supposed to have one ending and supposed to have fate set in stone, Flowery was honestly the best person to actually try to show Ralsei a way out. Go, I bet y'all could tell that was scripted, bro.